Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. I picked the site because it was unremarkable. A flat pad tucked just off a rutted spur road, a ring of blackened stones, one dead pine for leaning kindling. The kind of spot that doesn't have a name, only a mile marker in your head. Late September in the high country, the light already thinner, the shadows longer even before the sun made up its mind. I like ordinary places. Ordinary doesn't make promises it can't keep. Setup is muscle memory by now. Tent first, fly pulled drum tight, because a 2 a.m. gust will find whatever you leave loose. Bare line rigged, orange cord slung high with a throw rock until it kissed the right limb. Stove and water staged on the tailgate. Chair faces the trail, not the view. A habit you pick up after a few seasons of hearing twigs snap where you aren't looking. I tuned the battered AM/FM until a blues riff cut through static and let it stitch the silence while I stacked wood. By the time the ribeye hissed in cast iron, the day was all amber glass and pine resin. I heard them before I saw them. Voices up trail, not loud, just bright. 2 headlamps bobbing between the trunks. Then the beams dropped as they stepped into my circle of firelight like they'd been announced. Early 30s, maybe. She wore a beanie and a puffy, steam curling out of a metal mug. He had that neat beard you get when someone else trims it for you, fleece with a park patch like a merit badge, grin set at easy. "Evening," he said. "Mind if we borrow some heat? Fire isn't mine to gatekeep." "Pull up air," I said and waved at the ring. They introduced themselves, Jake and Alana, down trail in a blue tent just past the aspen cluster. We did the usual. "Where'd you come in?" which overlooks worth the extra steps. She teased me for camping solo. I told them a friend might show later. Half insurance policy, half superstition. They passed me a dented bottle of wine. I offered bourbon. The trade tasted like a truce. When conversation lulled, I saw where his headlamp kept landing, gear. Not curious exactly. Inventory. Knife on the chopping block. Bare line. Keys clipped inside the chair pocket. It wasn't a look that asked what. It was a look that measured how many. I ducked to the truck for foil and came back to a small emptiness. The chopping block was clean wood. My knife, orange handle for visibility, wasn't there. I checked the ground, the chair arm, under the pan. Nothing. The handle's the color you choose so you don't do this. Lose something? Alana asked, mug against her lip. Knife, I said like it was a word with edges. Jake crouched and nudged Bark with his boot. Didn't see you set it down, he said, friendly. The kind of friendly that makes your shoulders climb. I let it go out loud. The math in my head didn't. A knife doesn't walk off. We drifted back to trails and weather. They said goodnight. Their headlamps drew 2 chalk lines down the path, then dissolved among trunks. Laughter clung to the bark a second too long. I doused the fire to coals and told myself to sleep light. The ordinary routine is how you keep your hands from looking like they're shaking. Chair hauled a foot to clear my exit. Boots set pointed, not tossed. Keys in the pocket I can reach with my eyes closed. At 9:30, the beams came back, washing the clearing, stopping just shy of my ring. Hey, Alana said. We found something weird down by the creek. You should come see. What kind of weird? I asked from the chair. Like a structure, Jake said. Couple minutes tops. Looks like driftwood, she added, voice up at the end like an invitation. Sounds cool, I said. Rain check. Early start. They stayed at the edge of light just long enough to make me count it. Then Jake laughed and shook his head. Fair. We'll tell you about it, he said. Or bring it to you, Alana said, and they both thought that was funnier than it was. Their lights moved off again, the dark knitting itself where they'd been. I slid into the tent and arranged my sleeping bag so my hand could find the phone in the side pocket without fishing. The night had that shoulder shrug silence you only get high up. No bugs, just the occasional needle drop and the long breath of trees. Sleep came in shallow bowls. 20 minutes down, 5 up. Listen. Count. Pretend the shape you heard was wind. At some point the world clicked into a quieter gear, which is how you know your fire is almost done. Then a single stick snapped just outside the vestibule. Not the clatter of a raccoon. Not an elk. One weight, one decision. I held still. The zipper ticked. Slow. 3 inches. 4. A triangle of black air opened at knee height. Something glinted in that dark. My knife, my own orange-handled knife, caught what little glow was left and threw it back scaled down to a needle. His voice was a whisper pitched to slice. You should have come with us. I let my breath leave like I was still asleep. The sleeping bag is a trap if you panic. The phone in my hand weighed 1,000 pounds. Alana's giggle was a small bright thing at the edge of it all. "He looks peaceful," she said, like she was looking at a painting. The blade lingered at the gap, not moving, letting me know it knew where the fabric ends. Then it withdrew. The zipper closed with the care of someone who has practiced. Footsteps, not hurried, stepped backward through leaves. Then the quiet put its hand over everything again. I didn't sleep after that. I did the work of being still until gray diluted the black. Dawn makes even bad places look like they were reasonable all along. I unzipped the door and let the cold slap me awake. Their blue tent down trail was gone. No char in their ring. No trash. Just 2 oval patches where bodies had pressed grass flat. The kind of absence that's on purpose. At the ranger station, I told the story shorter than it is. Knife. Invite. Zipper. Whisper. The ranger didn't write anything down. He didn't look surprised either. "We've had a couple reports like that," he said, tone like weather. "They move around." He didn't offer a name. I didn't ask for one. I drove out past the overlook they said was worth it and didn't stop. At a pullout with a view of nothing special, I checked the chopping block again, like the knife might have found its way home. Of course it hadn't. I could still feel the handle in my palm anyway, only now it belonged to someone else's hand inside my night. The first night felt like a postcard. Lanterns strung between trees, kids on bikes with headlamps bobbing, campfire smoke stitched into the air. My dad and I ate hot dogs and let the ember light turn our faces the color of old pennies. Somewhere a Bluetooth speaker was brave enough to play classic rock low, and the creek did its part underneath, saying the same thing over and over in water language. It was exactly the sort of ordinary we go camping to feel, simple, shared, safe. The second night was a different animal before it even started. At the office near the trailhead, the ranger behind the plexiglass told us, almost cheerfully, "You two are it tonight. Slow week." He slid the receipt under the slot like a note you pass in class. My dad chuckled. "Whole park to ourselves," he said, as if that sentence couldn't have a shadow. The ranger added, "Weather's fine. Just you and the woods." And then the plexiglass reflected our faces back at us in that fluorescent way that makes you look like someone who forgot to sleep. Twilight didn't arrive so much as it held its breath and refused to leave. The sky took on that bruised metallic tint that makes you check your watch twice. We walked back from the information center with our phones at 100% and a bag of peanut M&Ms we didn't need. The path we'd strolled yesterday, kids darting ahead, a golden retriever smiling with its whole body, felt stretched like someone had set it on a rack and given it a careful turn. My dad said soft, "You feel that?" I did. It felt like a store at closing time when the lights aren't off yet, but the cash drawers are. We didn't name it. Naming would have made it a project to solve, and people don't solve the weather inside a forest. So we did the ordinary on purpose. Fire. Marshmallows. Music on the phone speaker low enough not to bother the trees. We traded sips, laughed a little, and let normal pile up like kindling. Darkness came anyway. It came from the ground up, filling the spaces under the benches and between the logs first, then folding itself over the branches until our fire was a small argument against a bigger opinion. The first bang was far enough away that we could pretend it wasn't a bang. We both looked up like deer do, ears not eyes. It sounded like a tree falling, but wrong. Not the ripping crash of bark and branches losing their war with gravity. It was a single hit, heavy and hollow at the same time. It came from the direction of the river, and the river paused half a measure, like it too wanted to hear how the story ended. We swung our flashlights that way. The beams ran into trunks and came back empty-handed. No eye shine, no wind, no nonsense you could blame it on. We did the human thing, we made a joke. "Bigfoot's drunk again," my dad said, and we let a laugh out, thin and hopeful. The second bang came closer. Same weight. Same punctuation mark at the end of a sentence we didn't write. We stood now, the fire on our shins and the hair on our necks explaining new physics. Third bang, different quadrant. The map in my head drew itself. There, then there, then there. A slow circle. My mouth tasted like pennies. "Let's get in the tent," my dad said, and that was a gift, because I didn't want to be the one to say it. He tossed the last of the wood on the fire, like he was feeding an animal we needed on our side. We zipped the tent and sat. I lay down because lying down made less noise than sitting. My dad stayed by the door with the knife we'd used to open the bratwurst package earlier. It looked small enough to use on an apple now. The fourth bang landed, so near the ground under us trembled. My dad froze halfway through the zipper motion. "It's standing there," he whispered, and I hated that he said it, because you can't unhear a sentence like that. "What?" I asked, and he shook his head without taking his eyes off the triangle of mesh. Like a wall. Then the hum started. I've never heard a sound you feel before you hear it. It came up through the soil and into our bones, a low-pressure wave that made the air waver inside the tent. Not loud. Not quiet. Just total. My chest went tight like an invisible bear hug. A tiny part of me wanted to cough just to prove I still could. "You feel that?" my dad said, but he wasn't asking. The hum held us there like a thumb over the pause button of a tape. When it changed, it didn't do it all at once. It added a thread underneath, a second note like a throat trying a new language. Then came a sound I have to borrow television to describe, a wet mechanical croak, somewhere between a big cat clearing its lungs and a synth pad a teenager would layer under a horror track. It wasn't animal. It wasn't a machine. It had intention, and the intention was in our direction. I had a window, a small mesh oval inches from my face. I could have looked. I didn't. Every part of my body understood that seeing would open a door I didn't know how to close. The hum grew teeth. The knife in my dad's hand meant less than it had 5 minutes ago. He kept holding it anyway, because we're built to hold something. I don't remember falling asleep. There was no decision. It was like the night reached in and pinched the wire between now and next, and when my eyes came back online, I was on my back, mouth dry, a cold bead of sweat traveling from ear to jaw like a small animal deciding which way to run. The tent was still. The fire outside had collapsed to a platter of ash. The air was the same dark temperature as a closed garage. "Time?" I asked. My voice didn't match my age. My dad checked his phone. "Dead," he said. Mine was dead too. Both had been full an hour, 2, earlier. That fact was either a technical glitch or a sentence with clause. We didn't discuss which. We unzipped as one body and stepped 5 feet from the tent to pee back to back. A ritual you don't realize is a ritual until you need it. The woods were a cathedral without congregants. Our food sat where we'd left it, our chairs at neat angles. Nothing rifled. Nothing tipped. If something had come for chaos, it had changed its mind. We waited for daylight inside the tent, like you wait for an elevator that's taking too long. No conversation, just the small work of being alive. Breathe, listen, breathe again. When gray finally showed itself in the weave of the rainfly, we packed the way you pack before a flight you're late for. The knife went away. The humor did too. We loaded the trunk and pointed the car toward a road we trusted to become a bigger road. Mom said maybe we inhaled something weird by the river. She said maybe we got spooked by the emptiness and turned our phones off without noticing. She said a lot of soft things to put a lid on a rattling pot. We nodded because she loves us. We nodded because we wanted a lid. But my dad hasn't camped since, and neither have I. We always went up north in October, same as church and school, and the first frost on the grass. Uncle Jim's place sat on 4 acres outside Grayling, a squat brown house with deer antlers over the garage and a wood pile that never seemed to shrink. The air up there tasted like iron and wet leaves. You could smell winter coming even when the sun was out. We'd pile in me, my brother Adam, our cousins Jake and Joe, while the grown-ups did their ritual. Cooler cracked, packers on low, stories that got a little louder each time they were told. Uncle Jim was a hunter, the kind who could track a blood drop through oak leaves at dusk. My dad wasn't, not really. He loved animals and apologized to spiders before carrying them outside. But together, after a couple beers, they turned into a 2-man expedition. That day over venison chili, my uncle said, "Boys, tent tonight? We'll set you up off the line, eh?" He meant off the property line, the trees he'd marked with red paint, so we wouldn't wander onto county land and get lost. Our moms did that look at each other, lips flat, eyebrows up, then sighed like they were signing a permission slip they'd regret. We carried the big tent between us, wobbling like we were moving a sleeping elephant. The ground out there had a spring to it, a green sponge of moss Uncle Jim called deer beds. He thumped it with his boot. Soft as anything. You'll sleep good, I promise. He and my dad gave us a half lesson in campcraft while trading jokes. Stake the corners, huh? Don't need you blowing to Wisconsin. The tent went up crooked but proud. We rolled our sleeping bags out in a row, flashlights on top like little lighthouses. Then we marched back to the house to kill a few hours before dark. Dinner was baked ziti and garlic bread, because Aunt Lisa said hunters eat Italian when they're not hunting. The moms asked again if maybe we were too young to sleep out alone. Our dads, already warm from the beer, grinned like boys themselves. "Close enough to hear you if you scream," my dad said, and my mom smacked his arm. The girls, my sister and our girl cousins, played spoons at the kitchen table and said camping was for mosquito boys. We pretended not to care. By the time we tromped back to the tent, the sky had flattened to that gray blue. That means you better find your flashlight. Our breath already showed. We packed ourselves in big coats and extra blankets like we were being smuggled in laundry. I set up Uno on the floor. "No wilds firsthand," I said like I knew rules. The four of us were lit in a circle by our flashlights propped against sneakers, beams up the tent poles like stage lights. Cards slapped, insults flew, Joe laughed too loud, and for a while it felt like a fort we'd built in a younger year. The scream cut through us like a drop dish. We froze mid-draw. It came from way off, thin and falling, a human shape without words. Joe's eyes went glassy. Jake looked at me like I'd know the right dad thing to say. I remembered some nature show. Foxes scream. "Sounds like a woman sometimes," I told them, voice steady I hoped. "Just a fox, eh?" That slipped out without me meaning it. Everyone breathed again. Uno restarted. I played a draw for like a villain. Then the second scream came closer. And this one didn't sound like a fox to me. There was a catch in it, a wobble like the throat making it couldn't decide between help and fury. The tent went quiet except for our breathing. My skin prickled all over in a slow wave. I clicked my flashlight off and whispered, "Lights." The others killed theirs too. Darkness fell like a blanket from the ceiling, instant, smothering, so total I could hear the blood in my ears. We scooted back to our sleeping bags, the nylon rasped loud as a zipper in a church. No one suggested running. Running meant stepping into the black and feeling it grab your ankles. Hiding inside a piece of cloth shouldn't feel safer, but it did. We got smaller. Adam's hand found my sleeve and didn't let go. Jake whispered, "Still a fox?" I couldn't lie without my voice cracking. "Don't know." For a minute the woods were just wind. Then leaves began to crunch. Not the skittery scatter of a raccoon. These were steps with weight, a quick human tempo, moving fast, coming straight. They stopped outside our door, close enough that the nylon breathed in and out with the pressure of whoever stood there. What happened next is burned into whatever part of the brain never cools down. The tent shuddered hard, poles creaked, fabric strummed. It felt like two hands had grabbed the far corners and shaken us, like a kid trying to wake a parent who won't wake. Joe made a sound I didn't know he could make. Jake said a word he wasn't allowed to say. My mouth acted before my head. "Go." I unzipped the door, and the cold slapped us. We poured out, for flashlights spearing trees, feet kicking leaves and roots, the air breaking in our throats. The scream chased us, right at our backs, higher now like it had grown smaller just to fit into our ears. We didn't look. That's the rule of being chased. If you look you trip, and if you trip you learn the bad ending. The red property marks on the trees came like buoys in a storm. Then porch light. Then people. Our whole family already outside from the first scream, faces raw with alarm, hands lifted. We barreled into them, a tangle of flashing beams and steam breath and words over words. Adam cried into Mom's coat. Joe hid under Aunt Lisa's arm. Jake tried to tell it all at once. I stood there shaking hips to heels, still seeing the tent sway like it was trying to stand up and run too. I was ready to accuse my sister, our cousins, because a prank is better than a stranger. But the girls were inside, pajamaed, cheeks creased from pillows. Aunt Lisa said they'd gone to bed a half hour before the first scream. No one said fox anymore. The dads got quiet in a way that meant business. Uncle Jim fetched 2 rifles and handed one to my dad without a joke. They went off toward the woods with the same hush as we'd left, boots careful, lights low. They were gone a long time. Long enough for the moms to wrap us in throws and sit us on the couch with hot cocoa we didn't drink. Long enough for the house to feel like a boat, and us the passengers who'd seen something in the water. When the men came back, their faces said nothing, which told us everything. "No tracks worth a darn," Uncle Jim said. "Ground's too spongy back there." My dad added, "Could be some kids from town cutting up," but he didn't sound convinced. I like the Ozarks in October, because everything gets honest. The heat backs off, the bugs stop screaming, the trails smell like leaf rot and clean rock. I'd been on the road alone long enough that my car looked like a studio apartment someone shook. People call me brave. Truth is, I'm just stubborn and allergic to other people's schedules. I wanted 3 quiet nights, walk, right, sleep. No witnesses except the hawks. That sort of plan fills the tank better than any treat-yourself weekend ever has. The trailhead was a dirt turnout with a sign half-eaten by vines. I shouldered my pack and took my time, photographing mushrooms like little altars, kneeling to tie my boot just to listen to the wind crawl the canopy. By afternoon I found a clearing that checked every box. Flat, not too close to the trail, old ring of stone someone else arranged years ago. The creek was 100 yards off, enough to be music but not a mosquito factory. I got the tent up before the light tipped amber and thought, yeah, this'll do. I made a small fire and ate something that started life as pasta and ended life as hot salt. I leaned against my pack and watched sparks climb. I was halfway through a second bourbon when I noticed movement down trail. At first I pegged it as deer, the way shapes slide through trees. Then 3 figures stepped onto the path like they'd been cut out of the dusk with scissors. 2 men, 1 woman. Packs, yes. Voices, no. Standard trail etiquette says you give a little wave, so I did. They didn't wave back. They didn't even look at me, which is its own kind of look. They peeled off the path into a flat spot, maybe 100 feet away. No one said howdy. No one said anything. In the Ozarks, even strangers give you a evenin', like a handshake. These 3 acted like I was a tree they were planning to ignore. Fine, I told myself. People camp weird all the time. I waited for the sound of tent poles clacking together, a stove hiss, maybe even a bad guitar. Instead, nothing. No flame, no chatter, just the sound of night taking over. Stealth campers, I figured. Not illegal, just odd this close to someone else. The fire burned to orange teeth, and I zipped into my tent. Sleep came in shallow bowls. Every time I rose up for air, I pictured them, sitting in the dark, awake, eyes open. Morning. Sun at an angle that made everything look righteous. I unzipped and stretched. Their camp was a still life. 3 bodies seated on the ground, backs straight, faces toward the trees. No pot boiled, no cup lifted. I called out mornin'. The woman turned her head a measure, enough to show she'd heard me. Then she pointed her face back at the woods. Like I wasn't there. I made coffee and tried to float above it. People are allowed to be odd. I journaled the usual, oak leaves like copper coins, creek talk, and then wrote what I didn't want to write. They make my skin feel inside out. Somewhere between my pen and the page I remembered a profile I'd swiped past months earlier. 3 20-somethings in hemp hoodies, ankles muddy caption. We seek partners who reject consumption. Back to Earth, back to US. I'd laughed at the time, then screenshotted it to send a friend. The faces weren't the same faces. But they could have been cousins, same clean, hungry eyes. I shut the notebook and decided I'd leave a day early. I kept camp small, dinner simpler. The woods thinned out into the kind of silence where you can hear your own stomach move. I brushed my teeth and got horizontal before dark finished happening, just to put nylon between me and whatever the hell they were doing. At some point, something like a footstep said my name from outside. My brain told me it was a branch. My body didn't buy it. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. Pack, hike, out. I rolled the bag tight, stuffed the tent, did the quick look so I wouldn't come back later for a forgotten spoon. As the pack rode up my shoulders, I felt movement. The trio stood up like they'd practiced it. Same moment, same angles. Not a glance at me. They didn't hoist their packs. They just turned their bodies toward the trail. Okay, I said to nobody and everybody. I kept a steady pace. Not fast, not slow. There's a gait you take on when you need to look uninteresting. Their footsteps feathered the leaves behind mine. Not closing. Not falling back. Just measuring. I didn't look over my shoulder. You learn that rule young. If you look, you invite. So I stared at the path and kept my arms loose and my breath even, and I thought about the pepper spray tucked into my sports bra and whether I'd actually be willing to use it. Yes. Absolutely. Fuck yes. Half a mile down, the trail split. A wide way on, and a side path I knew from topo study, narrow and stony, a rude little loop back to the road. I cut onto it fast, ducked between cedar, then off the path into a pocket of rocks and brush. I crouched low, arms around my shins, pack against my back to make myself the smallest rock in a pile of rocks. I counted my breathing like a metronome, so I wouldn't gasp. The forest pressed its palm over my mouth. Their footsteps reached the junction and kept to the wide path. No voices. No which way? The woman, if it was the woman, I was parsing shapes, not people, turned her head and looked straight into the cedars where I was. Not hunting around. Direct. Like she knew and decided I wasn't ripe enough to pick. My lungs locked. Every cell in me went to alert, that hum animals make when they've chosen stillness over sprinting. After a beat that I swear left a bruise, she faced forward. The three of them walked on until the sound drained off the trees. I stayed curled long enough for my calves to cramp. When I finally moved, every twig sounded like an alarm. The side path spit me out near the turnout where my car sat like a promise. I drove to town with my hands shaking, so hard I left damp marks on the wheel. At the first gas station, I sat under the buzzing fluorescents and laughed once, sharp, wrong, and then almost cried from the stupid, animal relief of being surrounded by soda refrigerators and people in logo shirts. I don't camp to prove anything. I'm not the guy who posts smile counts or weighs his toothbrush to shave grams. I work IT contracts, password resets, servers that decide 3 a.m. is a good time to die, and when I go to the woods it's for the simplest kind of quiet. A place where the only thing that pings is a woodpecker. My son Ben had just turned 8, and I'd promised him a proper father-son trip, the kind that feels big in the moment and bigger when you remember it later. My wife said I was trying to convince myself I was still rugged. Maybe. Mostly I just wanted to hear my kid ask questions no one has to answer quickly. We avoided the boardwalk town version of Lake George, t-shirt shops and ice cream bells, and drove north into the part of the Adirondacks where the trailheads are just weathered planks nailed to trees. The forest there smells like cold water and iron-rich dirt. A brook does the talking for everyone else. We parked in a dirt turnout with 2 other cars, which is how you know it's popular but not Instagram popular, and shouldered our packs. Ben wore his like a turtle shell and asked if bears had calendars. I told him no, but they know when fall's coming anyway. The hike-in was just long enough to feel private, not so long that his legs filed a complaint. We passed a couple on their way out, matching trekking poles, coordinated smiles. "Sight by the stream is open," the woman said, as if we'd reserved it. We found it not far beyond, a flattish patch tucked above the water, ring of stones, a log just at the right knee height for breakfast. The brook ran 20 steps away, a silver ribbon making all the right sounds. Setting up with an 8-year-old is slower, but more honest. He staked 2 corners and I staked 2 corners and he said, "It's teamwork, Dad, like a coach." He discovered the headlamp strobe, which I allowed exactly twice before confiscating it in the name of everyone not wanting a rave in the hemlocks. We hung the bear bag, which he christened the pantry, on a rope. Dinner came out of pouches, and somehow still tasted like a story worth telling. We burned a marshmallow on purpose, because tradition is just a series of things you do on purpose until they feel holy. Night in that forest settles in layers. Birds clock out. The brook keeps working. The air folds itself sharper. We let the fire sink to teeth and climbed into the tent. Ben unrolled his sleeping bag like he was opening a present, then asked if satellites were stars with jobs. "Yep," I said. "They're stars that have to punch a time card." He laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out mostly nose because he was already falling asleep. He put his small hand under his cheek, and the tent got that warm, zipped feeling where you realize everything you need is already in the circle of light. I woke before dawn for no reason that's easy to name. The light was the color of dishwater, the kind that tells you the sun exists but won't vouch for you yet. I rolled onto an elbow and blinked through the tent door. A man sat on the log by our dead fire. He wasn't rifling through our stuff. He wasn't creeping with the kind of tentative steps raccoons do. He sat like a guest at a table that had been set for him. 60, maybe older. Wool cap flattened by years. Jacket that might have once been part of a suit, now demoted to the outdoors. Clean shaven. Hands folded. Smiling. Not a grin, not a leer. Just a half smile like he'd been thinking a long thought and found a polite end to it. What I noticed more than his face was the absence around him. No pack, no bottle, no headlamp band around his forehead, no due-dark gear leaning against a tree. No one walks in before dawn to sit at a stranger's cold fire without bringing anything. Except, apparently, him. Ben slept on, mouth open slightly, kid breath milk sweet. I didn't move for a beat. Stillness sometimes buys time. Then I said the thing you say because you grew up where people say it on porches and in hardware stores. "Morning." He turned his head as if I had arrived instead of him. "I just wanted to see what kind of people sleep with their backs to the trail," he said. It took my brain a second to pick the lock on that sentence. I looked past him to where the path ran behind our tent, a dark seam between trees. He was right. Our heads faced the brook. Our spines made a straight line with a walkway. Easy pickings. I wanted to say 100 things. Where'd you come from? You okay? You need something? but every question felt like it would enroll me in a conversation I didn't want to take. "Didn't hear you come in," I said instead, voice low because Ben was a bubble I didn't want to pop. He nodded once, satisfied, like my answer had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. He put his palms on his thighs, pushed up slow, brushed off his pants with both hands. Then he turned uphill, not toward the marked trail, not toward anything obvious, and walked into the trees. No stumble, no sideways glance, no crunch loud enough to measure. The forest swallowed him in 3 steps, like you shut a book. I waited for something, anger, relief, the aftertaste of adrenaline, but what I felt first was embarrassment. I had angled the tent for the view of the water like a catalog photo. I had played at competence and overlooked the practical. I had slept with my back to the road. Ben stirred and blinked. "Is it pancake time?" he asked, which was generous considering I'd brought instant oatmeal and a pan you can't flip anything in. He squinted toward the log. "Was someone here?" "Just a hiker passing through," I told him. He grinned. "Like a ninja?" "Something like that," I said, and I let it be the version he remembers. We did a short day hike after breakfast, the kind where a kid picks up every interesting stick and returns with a staff taller than he is. But my eyes kept dragging back to that log, back to the place where the man had sat clean and patient. When we packed up, I angled the tent door toward the trail before I collapsed it, like it mattered in the account ledger of mistakes. Back home, my wife called it a weird wilderness encounter, and I agreed because the word weird is a blanket you can throw on almost anything. Ben told her we'd camped with a ninja who showed up in the morning, and she laughed until she looked at me and saw I wasn't laughing the same way. I don't make the story bigger than it is when I tell it. He didn't threaten. He didn't move toward us. He didn't even touch anything. But sometimes, when I wake at 4, I see the way he looked not at me, but at the tent itself, at the way we had arranged ourselves without thinking. I hear his sentence again, polite and pointed. I practice my new habit in my head. Door to the path, head to the door, back to nothing anyone can walk up behind. I'm not a hardcore guy. I do spreadsheets all week and drive into Pisgah on Fridays to remember my body is more than a screen. My version of outdoorsy is a decent tent, a cooler with actual food, and a paperback I'll pretend to read until the fire hypnotizes me. May 2022, I left Asheville early, beat the Friday exodus, and rattled a few miles down a gravel road until the trees opened their palm around a pull-off. Flat pad, blackened fire ring, a skinny stream whispering somewhere behind the rhododendron. Perfect. The kind of spot that looks like nothing on a map and everything when you're tired of email. Setup is a ritual I could do half asleep. Tent and fly tight, because Blue Ridge wind will play you for a fool. Bag fluffed, pad inflated, headlamp checked. Cooler tucked under the car's shadow. Stove and mug laid out like a place setting for one. I thought about a fire, decided to eat first. Rice and chicken I'd cooked at home, warmed in foil on the stove until it hissed. A swallow of gas station coffee that tasted like burnt hope. The woods tuned themselves, birds clocking out, bugs ratcheting up, water doing white noise therapy for free. Headlights slid through the trees. A truck rolled to a stop on the road beside my sight. 2 men climbed out, caps pulled low, hoodies that looked like they'd lived long lives outdoors. Dust on their jeans in the way of people who don't notice dust. The tall one had the kind of smile you give someone before you deliver a parking ticket. The shorter one scanned, not curious, not friendly, just tallying. I stood because sitting felt too much like prey. "Evenin'," I called, defaulting to porch manners. "Evenin'," the tall one answered. His drawl had that lazy mountain syrup that can sound soft until it doesn't. He looked at my tent, then me. "This our spot. These aren't reservable," I said, gentler than the sentence wanted to be. He kept the smile. "Thinner. We use it most weekends." "It's taken." "Ah." I nodded at my stake tent, cooler chair. "I can pack up if you want." "Give me 10. The shorter one shook his head. "Nah, you're fine. Stay." He said it like a dare. Something in my stomach went tight. "You sure?" I asked, because I was raised polite even when the dog shows teeth. "Positive," the tall one said. "A beat. You fixin' to make a fire?" The question landed wrong. Shame prickled at my neck because I'd already decided not to, and now it felt like I'd done something impolite at a table with rules I didn't know. "In a bit," I said. They turned back to the truck. Instead of leaving, they rolled maybe 100 feet down, pulled off into the trees, and killed the lights. The road went back to being a road. The truck sat like a closed eye. Don't overthink it, I told myself. Locals get possessive about their little slices of forest. It's not personal. I built a fire anyway. Hurt your feelings on your own time, fear. And sat with my enamel mug and the paperback I wouldn't read, letting the flames do the ancient trick. Every so often, I glanced toward the dark shape of their truck. Nothing moved. If they were still there, they were now just part of the wood's opinion. By 10, I couldn't keep my eyes open. I doused the fire, zipped the tent, and slid into the bag. Keys and phone in the corner pocket. Habit that felt like superstition until it didn't. Sleep came in the choppy tide it always does your first night. Drift, surface to an owl's punctuation, fall again. The forest has a rhythm, wind, creek, insect, and once you tune to it, anything off time slaps you awake. The whispers were off time. At first I told myself it was wind pushing a tangle of leaves into consonants. But the cadence was wrong. Two voices, low, sharing an edge. They moved along the tent's left side, toward the door, paused. Words I couldn't make out, just the hum of sentence. I went from dozing to awake like a door slamming. My throat dried to paper. I held still because moving felt like confessing. The sound I hate more than any sound came next. The long, slow rasp of a zipper being persuaded open. 3 inches. 4. The flap sighed. Cool air spilled across my face, night's breath with a faint tang of diesel and tobacco. My body made a decision without asking permission. I grabbed my phone with one hand, yanked the opposite zipper with the other, and went through the opening like a cork. Barefoot. Stones and sticks needling my soles. I sprinted into the dark, which is the dumbest and only thing to do when your tent becomes smaller than the space around it. I dove behind a downed poplar, heart banging against my ribs like a loose cabinet. I held the phone to my chest so it wouldn't light up and sell me out. The tent sat in the clearing like a mouth with a loose lip. The whispers stopped. Shuffling. A cooler lid squeaked. Fabric brushed nylon. I pressed my tongue to my teeth to keep them from chattering. The woods lifted their chin and pretended nothing was happening. Time broke into stupid pieces. 30 seconds felt like a week. A week felt like a cough. Insects sang because they don't care about us. When I finally risked a look, the sight was a still life again. Tent unzipped to a mean smile. Chair toppled. No men, no truck lights, no movement. The kind of absence that feels smug. I stayed in the trees until the sky bled from black to purple. Every step back to camp was a negotiation with my spine. I crouched, gathered what I could without opening the tent farther, shoved it into the car. Chair left behind, tarp abandoned, tent half collapsed and stuffed into the hatch like a snake you don't have time to coil. Keys in ignition, locks down, gravel hissing, hands shaking so hard I left sweat prints on the wheel. I didn't breathe right until pavement. At a gas station outside Brevard, I parked under buzzing fluorescent and put my forehead against the steering wheel. Laughed once, short and not funny. Said fuck to the dashboard because there wasn't anyone else to say it to. My feet throbbed. The zipper sound kept replaying in my head like a bad song you can't shake, metal teeth being parted, slow, intimate, the kind of pace you use when you want to make the other person feel your patience. I felt filthy with it, like a hand had been on my throat, and I'd only just noticed the print. I went back a week later with a buddy to retrieve what I'd dumped. Daylight made the place look like it always had, harmless. Birds doing bird things. A couple in a Subaru murmuring over a map. In the clearing, the cooler sat off to one side like a lit jar. Contents gone. Chair gone. The tent was there only because I dragged it to the car like a body. We told a ranger. Gave him the short version. Call next time, he said. Even if you ain't sure. He was younger than me and already looked tired of hearing men pretend they weren't afraid. He wrote something on a pad that meant nothing would happen. I remember the sky was the color of a frozen bruise the day I drove up to Rocky Mountain National Park. March 2020, empty roads, taped X's on storefronts, that hushed like the world had swallowed its own breath. I told anyone who bothered asking that camping was social distancing in its purest form. Truth was, I was hiding. After what happened at work in 2019, the mistake, the money lost, the whispers snowballing into names I can't scrub off, hiding felt like the only thing I was any good at. New number, new apartment, job quit. The texts had stopped for a while. I figured the pitchfork parade got bored. It was late afternoon when I shouldered my pack and followed the trail toward the creek. Thin crust of snow over everything, so cold it sang under my boots, crack, crunch, crack like glass breaking in slow motion. I didn't see another soul. The winter quiet in that valley had edges, Even the wind sounded like it was keeping its coat closed. When I reached the water, it wasn't frozen. It ran black and fast under a rim of ice, talking to the rocks in that steady way creeks do. I stood there a minute and let it wear me smooth. I pitched the tent off the path, far enough into the spruce that I felt tucked in. Chopped wood until my arms warmed, coaxed the fire with the small stove until the logs caught. Sausages hissed in the pan, grease popping like distant static. When it got near dark, I read by headlamp, words sliding over each other because my brain kept replaying old arguments with people I'll never speak to again. I rolled a joint, telling myself it was just to quiet the chatter. 2 drags, 3. The edges of the world softened. The fire threw up sparks that looked like someone shaking glitter through the trees. That's when my phone buzzed. I don't get a lot of texts that aren't my family, so the vibration hit like a live wire under the skin. I fished the phone from my jacket pocket and saw an unfamiliar number with a 203 area code. Connecticut. I don't know anyone in Connecticut. How's your camping going, buddy? The words felt like cold fingers on the back of my neck. I stared at them a beat too long, like if I didn't blink, they'd make sense. Another message came before I could type. It's beautiful out here. And then, I see why you came up here. The joint tightened my chest all at once. My throat went dry, and the trees seemed to crowd closer, needles whispering. If it had just been that first text, I could have shrugged it off. But this was someone standing inside my night with me. My default kicked in. Who is this? Thumbs clumsy on the screen. No answer. I got up without meaning to, did a slow circle with the headlamp beam cutting slices of white from the dark. Every step I took shoved that wet glass crunch into the silence. Nothing moved. Still, I went to my bag and pulled out the P365. I'd bought it because of the harassment, first gun I've ever owned. It felt heavier than it looked, the way a decision does. Usually I douse the fire before bed, but the idea of darkness pressing against the tent from every side turned my stomach. I left it down to coals, ducked into the tent, and zipped myself in. I told myself I'd read, but the words wouldn't sit still. I tried YouTube instead, bad choice, murder documentary of all things, and let the talking head fill the silence. The joint had me in that laggy space where your thoughts arrive half a second late. The phone buzzed again. Doesn't matter anymore. My heart came up into my mouth. I typed, "How did you know I'm camping?" No answer. Not for a long time. Long enough that the fire's glow bled down to orange embers, and the tent fabric cooled under my fingertips. In winter, there's no buzz blanket of insects, no frogs. Just wind sometimes, and everything else is thin quiet. When the video stopped, the silence sat on my chest. Footsteps. I knew what I was hearing, because snow tells the truth. Human, not animal. Slow steps, like someone trying not to sound like someone. They came from the trees, angled toward me, and stopped 6 feet from the tent. I didn't breathe. The gun handle was slick in my palm. A white flash blew through the fabric, a camera or a phone, pointed right at me. Then the steps receded, careful as they came. My phone dinged. The photo was of my tent taken from the exact angle where the flash had come from. My tent, my sad little castle, a smear of ember light ghosting the snow beside it. Then the next message. Have a good night's sleep. The switch flipped in me. We'd gone, heat flooding my arms, a clear confidence rising like something ancient. I unzipped the tent in one drag, stood in the night, and fired 2 shots into the air. The sound cracked off the valley walls and came back thinner. Snow exploded under running feet somewhere out there, not as far as I wanted. I shouted something I don't remember, something big and ugly meant to carry. Then I ducked back inside, hands shaking now that the noise was done. No more texts. No more footsteps. Just me breathing fast, the gun on my chest like a second heart. The hours after were elastic. I lay awake and counted my pulse until numbers didn't mean anything. When I finally slept, it was like falling off a ledge. Morning arrived with a shock of light off the snow. For a second I didn't know where I was. Then the creek spoke and the smell of old smoke threaded the cold, and the night unspooled itself in my head. I stepped out, boots biting into the crust, and looked for prints. There were arcs of churned snow leading in and out of the trees. A path in, a path away, messy where mine were neat. No sign of the person, of course. There never is later. Only proof that the dark wasn't empty. I didn't bother with breakfast. I packed mechanically, hands moving like it was a drill. I kept the gun in the waistband, safety on, metal pinching skin through thermals. The hike out was too quiet. In daylight, the trail looked harmless and small, and I wanted to hate it for that. At the truck, I sat with my forehead on the steering wheel and felt something like shame and relief fighting it out in my stomach. Shame for the fear, relief that fear did what it's supposed to do. 5 years later, nobody's texted me like that again. Maybe the gunshot did the talking I couldn't. Maybe whoever it was just wanted the picture, the proof that I could be found. I still don't camp without thinking about that flash. I still check the area code when an unknown number pops up.